Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pisces Guide to Pop Culture. I'm, of course, your host, TJ. I want to talk to you today about Outlander, Blood of My Blood, the new prequel series currently streaming on Starz, which I have to say I adored the first two episodes that we got this past weekend. Now, I will admit that I fell off the wagon of the Outlander series, the original show, both the original show and the book. Once they get to the US, I'm just not that interested. For me, the appeal was always the Scottish history, and so I'm so thrilled that this time we're going to be pretty much exclusively in Scotland, because as it turns out, we're going to be focusing on Jamie's parents, Ellen and Brian, and on Claire's parents, Julia and Henry. Now, they're played by Harriet Slater, Jamie Roy, Hermione Corfield, and Jeremy Irvin, respectively. So I'm not going to refer to them endlessly, but I do think it's really kind of fun to sort of talk about these people, because I really love the way this show kind of just leans into the romantic beauty and lilting Scottish accents. Like, it's all the things I loved about the first couple seasons of Outlander. And then some. And the cast is superb. I think that both Slater and Roy are just absolutely perfect as Jamie's parents. In fact, Roy looks just enough like Jamie that you can imagine, and that you can see him sort of giving birth to him. And of course, he probably gets his red hair from his mother. At the same time, in the present, we have the Beechams, who end up getting thrown back into time. As it turns out, Claire's parents are time travelers themselves, and of course, they have to sort of make sense of the 18th century, the early 18th century, in the same way that Claire had to in the original show. Adding to all of this, we also have Dougal and Cullum, who are, in the younger versions of themselves, who are played by Sam Redford and Seamus McLean Ross. So we get that whole brotherly dynamic, and at this point, their father has just died, and so they're competing to find out who's going to be the Laird. And then rounding out the sort of major cast, we have Tony Curran, who is brilliant as the lecherous Lord Lovett, who is Brian Fraser's father. Although Brian, as it turns out, is a bastard child. So obviously there's a lot going on in these first two episodes to sort of establish who these characters are, what's happening, why we should care. And I mean, there doesn't really need to be a reason other than these are, the principal characters from the original show's parents. But I will say that there is a lot going on that I really enjoy. I love that we get this sort of understanding that Ellen is very upset because her father died without naming an heir, and of course she wasn't going to be the heir anyway because she's a lassie and not a lad. So it's a whole, there's a lot of gender play and, sort of illuminating the very restricted roles that women can play in Highland culture, because even though it's acknowledged that she is much smarter than either of her brothers, she nevertheless has to contend with the fact that there's sexism is rampant, and that she's basically just becoming a marriage pawn in Cullum's games, or in her brother's games, to get the leadership of the clan. And so, of course, then on the other hand, we have Julia and Henry, who are both brilliant. And I think the second episode really sort of lays out Henry's post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in the trenches. And so, we get some rich historical World War I detail there as well. So there's a lot going on in these first two episodes. But I do think that it captures so much of what made the original show so appealing in those first couple seasons. First of all, there's the Scottish part of it. There's just something, I think, innately appealing to Scottish culture, particularly in this period. This is before the horrors of Culloden. So we are sort of, the period, that sort of Edenic period before the shit hits the fan, roughly 50 years later. Now, and I love the chemistry between the two major leads. I think that there's a lot to build on there, and these are couples that I already care about. Obviously the Ellen and Brian thing is a very much star-crossed lovers, because their families hate each other, and I'm a sucker for a star-crossed lover story. Obviously with Henry and Julia, it's a little more complicated because they're separated once they go through the stones, and so much of the narrative is going to be about them finding each other, and sort of because she is sort of becomes a servant / slave really to Lord Lovett, whereas Henry becomes the bladier to one of the other powerful Highland families. So, like I said, there's so much to sink your teeth into when it comes to this. Now, I will say, and I love the bond, or the sort of the tension between Cullum and Dougal, which we know in the future the two will have reached the sort of one of them is the brains, the other is the brawn, but we're not there yet. And so it's kind of interesting to see how that takes shape. Now, I will say, I'm a little frustrated that we still have this whole specter of sexual assault and rape, because Lord Lovett is basically a lecherous old man who wants to assault Julia repeatedly. I mean, it's always kind of there, and I wish that premium TV would find a better way of conveying how uncertain life could be as a woman, other than through the ever-present specter of rape. Like, that is just so problematic and so overdone. HBO beat us over the head with it. House of the Dragon does somewhat as well. Outlander, Lord knows, the original show, there's a lot of it. So I wish we could find some other better way of expressing this. Than just kind of relying on this trope repeatedly. I don't think that we need to repeatedly be reminded that, oh, by the way, women in 18th century Scotland were repeatedly raped, or there was a specter of rape. But other than that, I did really enjoy these couple of episodes, and I'm really happy that we have this Scotland set drama. That there's a lot of time traveling. We can get into the sort of retconning at some other later point, but for now, I just want to say that I love these first two episodes. I hope that that the fandom continues to grow, and I hope maybe to connect with some other fans of Outlander here on TikTok. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me as always. This does get the Spicy Side Guide to Pop Culture seal of approval. I'm sure that I'll have many more things to say down the line as we get more and more episodes. So that's all I have for today. So as always, I'm your host TJ, and I hope that you had a great time listening to this. I had a great time talking about it. So anyway, have a great day, y'all, and I will talk to you soon. Take care, y'all.